Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It, the podcast to help you fix your marriage. I'm Shai Lewis. I'm here with Nina Rosner. Our mission is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build connection so you can have a thriving marriage. So today our topic is what to say when dysfunction is normalized. So I was just talking to Nina before we hit record on here about if this is a thing, because I wasn't quite sure, and I heard back from her that it is a thing, and so Nina, welcome. Let's just jump right in. So today we're talking about the thing that happens when you're in this negative cycle, this not so great relational pattern. And it's almost like there is an intentionality behind mm-hmm. the dysfunction. It's almost like sabotage, basically, where it feels like no matter how hard you try, no matter what you say, it always ends up going in this one direction. And so I want to talk about that today and how that shows up in our relationship. So welcome. Would love to hear your thoughts about this dynamic.
Well, I hope they're inspired. I hope they're from the Lord. The first thing that comes to mind around this is alcoholism. I dated a guy in college who was not an alcoholic. We were together for a month, but he grew up in an alcoholic home. Mm. And I remember like 3 weeks into the relationship, I had access to his apartment and went in and made him dinner. And he came in, and instead of being what would be considered normal and healthy in response, I mean, that'd be a thank you. That'd be, oh, this is great. You know, he starts yelling at me because I made a mess on his stove and his counters and I hadn't cleaned it up. Like he was screaming at the top of his lungs and throwing stuff and berating me. And I'm just standing there going, wow, mm-hmm. Nobody's ever treated me like this. Mm-hmm. And I ended up, he tried to drag me into his dysfunction. I went to one of his Al-Anon meetings and I had this really pervasive awareness that when you grow up in an alcoholic home, it's chaos. Mm-hmm. Like regular, consistent. The only consistent thing is chaos. You don't know when the next shoe is going to drop. And I ended up breaking up with him and then had to get a restraining order on him. Like it was whoosh. And this is after a month of relationship. Like, and it wasn't even deep relationship. Like, I'm not kidding. It was crazy, but that was normal for him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I ran into one of his old girlfriends during this process or after or something. And this is long time ago, but I remember her looking at me and saying, I'm so glad you got out. I spent 2 years with him and it made me crazy. And I was just like, wow, that's a thing too. I'm so glad. Right. But, you know, to your point, dysfunction, it's like, how do you define what's normal? Right. Right. We can do normal from a healthy, functioning relationship that's good for both people, mm-hmm. right? Win-win style. Or we can do, well, this functions for me and I get what I want when I pitch fits and scream and yell and I'm scary. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so sometimes relationships don't start there, but they creep into that. Right. His creep was, well, he was a creep real fast. Let's just say it that way. I shouldn't have said that. I was poking fun at him. That's judgmental, I guess. But it was, anyway, God loves him too. And I've been terrible in relationships as well. So I'm not any better. I don't mean to sound that way. But my point is that, you know, for him, it was a fast degradation into what is considered aberrant behavior, mm-hmm. verbally abusive, damaging behavior. But we also see this in normal, healthy relationships that start out normal, healthy relationship style, and then they devolve over time because people don't call each other up into a higher level of being when we get tired, angry, and then act like a child. That needs to be dealt with when it happens. And if we don't deal with it, we're condoning it and we get more of it. And that's not necessarily our fault, but it's partly our responsibility to handle that. And if we don't, we get what we get.
Yeah. And that's what we want to talk about today. If you don't do this well, you're going to get basically more of the same behavior. And honestly, you can start to adopt that dysfunction yourself if it becomes your normal. Mm-hmm. All right. So I was watching a podcast. It was between three men, and they were all talking about relationships and how they're all like single and looking for, someone, a partner. And one of them was actually a pastor, and he was the guest speaker. And this particular guy had been through a divorce, and he was sharing how he was led to a healing process after his divorce, and how it helped him to own a lot of things that he had done in the relationship. And he said one of the things that he realized that he did was he was asking for peace and he was asking for no drama, but he wasn't owning the fact that he was starting the war.
Oh, that's
right?
awesome. That's great that he knew that.
Right. But it took like, the marriage, I know, right? Like,
yeah.
So I was just thinking about that and how sometimes this dynamic of dysfunction is not intentional. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it really isn't. And it comes from maybe how we grew up, the home we grew up in. Maybe there's just been unhealthy behavior for a long period of time in the marriage. And there has to be something that brings awareness to the fact that there is dysfunction here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, for the most part, we don't recognize it when we could early. We wait until we're so miserable and the other person's behavior, and ours, by the way, has gotten so bad that we don't even recognize who we are anymore. And we don't like the person we've become. And we certainly don't like our spouse any longer. Yeah, can I tell a story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell a story to paint the picture of this. I was probably a fourth or fifth grader, and I'm sitting outside because even though it was like 20 below zero, when in Montana, when I was a child, you went outside for recess and it didn't matter what the weather was. Like you just did. Like it had to be 50 below or something stupid for them to let us sit inside for recess, and we'd go to the gym. But we're outside, it's freezing, and we're all lined up, huddled, hoping body heat. We didn't intentionally do that, but we're just waiting for them to open the doors and let us in. And Marjorie Steller comes up to me and she goes, "So I have a bone to pick with you." And everything in me just flooded. I had no idea what had I done. Here's this girl verbally accosting me. And I said, okay. And she was a friend of mine, really good friend of mine. She goes, "You were poking fun at me about liking Jordan, and I don't. And I don't appreciate it that you're saying things that are not true about me. And I want you to stop." And I was like, okay, all right. And I was just trying to be funny. And I made some comment, just one, and teased her a little bit in front of others. And she called me out on it. I never did it again. Like I just did not. And inside of me, I went, wow, how did she do that? Mm-hmm. Because when I was growing up, I was a victim of bullies. Mm-hmm. I was the kid that was so surprised all the time when somebody would be mean to me. I was sexually harassed in fourth grade of all things, like by other children. It was awful. I got beat up after school. I never knew what to do to handle those things. Right. And I didn't know how to interact with it. And what's true about all of that is that I was I was being nice instead of being good. I was terrified of somebody not liking me. Mm-hmm. And so I would just be so nice and so giving. And I don't know if you remember being a fourth grader, but those guys are vultures. I mean, they're
kids are mean.
Terrible creatures. Mm-hmm. You know, they're mean. And if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile because they're children. That's what children do. Well, when we're in an adult relationship, if that's how we're acting, if we're just being so nice and I'm going to keep doing all these things and we don't have any boundaries, and then this person just keeps taking advantage of us, we're creating that. Mm-hmm. We are condoning it and we're feeding it. And some people are like, well, you know, sacrifice like Jesus did, lay down your life. And it's like, no, if you're married to a believer, you're supposed to call them to a higher level of being. You're supposed to confront a brother in his sin against you. It is not good for us to condone the sin of other people towards us. We need to call that out. We need to be vocal about it.
Right.
Everybody hates that, but that's what's true. And if we don't do that, we have nobody to blame but ourselves for it perpetuating. Mm-hmm. Ouch. Right? But ouch.
Right. Ouch. For sure. Ouch. So I'm thinking about the marriage where one person is like yourself, where they're trying to be nice because that's all they know. And then the other person's like your friend, where they're like, no, in your face. Yeah. So mm-hmm. How does that work when one person knows to do this, the other person doesn't, and they're clueless and getting to a place where both people are being called up higher and it's not just deer in the headlights, like,
yeah. So you get two people, one of them might come to terms with their own maleficence, you know, the internal evil that exists within them, and say, you know what, and you know, being able to call somebody out on something doesn't make you evil. But if you constantly are standing up for yourself and it's oh boy, you know what, and this person's in me too. If people don't push back on me and say no, I don't know that I won't take advantage too. We don't know the monster within us.
That's good.
I'm terrible this way in some spaces. Like I'm late for meetings and I'm working on it, but I'm late because nobody holds me accountable for being on time. Isn't that awful? But yeah. So I noticed that.
I'm laughing because it's me too. I'm in that same camp.
Okay. All right, good. Yeah. But and maybe it's not that. Maybe it's something even worse. You know, maybe it's getting somebody to do your work at work because you know how to manipulate people. Like I used to be that guy. Before I became a Christian, I was a master manipulator. I was really good at getting people to do what I wanted them to do. And it was all about me. And that's a horrible thing to say out loud. And it's true, though. We have that ugly within us, and we have to acknowledge it. And the good side of having that is that we're a force to be reckoned with. When we become a Christian, we don't stop existing in humanity, and we don't become this doormat for others to wipe their feet on. That is not what he's called us into. He's called us into service, absolutely. But when we're talking about two Christian people being married, it's a little bit different when you're married to a non-Christian. I don't want to talk about that today. But when you're married to somebody that professes to follow Christ and they're behaving in verbally aggressive and abusive, damaging ways, and you're doing nothing about that, okay, you're going to have more of it. Yeah. So to your point about what do you do? Well, you have to have an awareness that everything in the relationship at that point is wrong. That's wrong. And you're contributing to the wrongness by not doing anything. So personal responsibility, I hate saying this. It's true though. And I've been there, done that. And, I've had some relationships where I've gotten walked all over. And it's been because I didn't speak up. And I'm not that girl anymore. And I'm also not terrible to deal with. I can tell the truth to somebody. I can say, hey, I didn't really like it when XYZ happened. Do you mind if next time we blah, blah, blah? It's simple. It doesn't have to be a big emotional drama thing. So,
yeah.
But somebody has to grow up and stop it.
And I think part of it too is recognizing not saying anything is equally dysfunctional.
Hello. Yes.
I think we miss that, because obviously if there's verbal attack or, behavior that is just outward, that appears to be dysfunctional. Everybody can see that. But the enabling part is less, noticeable. And sometimes it takes, something happening in order to bring that to the surface as well. And so I think that's essentially what I'm getting at, is how do we get to the place where you're not just looking at the person that's having a tantrum as the dysfunctional one, you're starting to look at yourself as well as, what is my contribution to the dysfunction?
Exactly. And and it's, oh, my word, there's Bible verses that get levied at us like arrows, and we get beaten over the head with them. Well, have a gentle and quiet spirit. And it's like, well, yeah, that's for that person who's not saved, in that space for sure. But we think that speaking up is yelling, and so we can't say anything because we won't be gentle and quiet. Well, how about both? How about we can be respectful? We can say, hey, I love you, and I can hear your love for me when you speak to me kindly. Let's try this conversation a little bit differently later. And you leave the room. What that communicates is, oh, I can't talk to her like this. Yeah, that's a piece. Or, hey, it seems like you're upset about something. What's going on? It's not like you to yell at me and accuse me of doing all sorts of stuff. Like, what's going on? And then if there's more you language, it's like, hey, we don't treat each other like this. I encourage you to figure out what's going on with you. And then I'm happy to have a conversation about the issue, but I'm not going to sit here and be blamed and called all sorts of names. We can talk later. It's simple, it's calm, it's respectful, and it's needed in relationships. If you don't have boundaries and guardrails in relationships for the behaviors that are acceptable, you'll accept anything. And that just degrades over time.
Okay, so what about the person that is overwhelmed? Okay, like they're in a situation where they're trying to survive. And so it can feel like nearly impossible to get there, because setting a boundary requires a certain level of knowing who you are, your identity being solid, having the inner work, and all the things we talk about.
Right.
What if they're in a place where they can't even get there because they're just in survival mode? Is there something they can do? Is it a self-care type of solution? Like what are some things that you would suggest for that?
Well, I think like it's all that basic stuff. You're right on with the self-care piece. We've got to, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we cannot do what God has called us to do. The car can't move if it doesn't have gas in it. You got to put your own air mask on before you put somebody else's on. And to your point, we're the most important person we have to take care of. And that doesn't mean that we're more important than other people. It means that we take care of ourselves first, and we navigate that and then create margin. That becomes a thing. If we're overwhelmed, okay, and this is the secret sauce to everything. Because if we don't take responsibility, we have no power. We're saying we're a victim of my circumstances. And so what does it look like to take responsibility? What can I do? How am I contributing to my overwhelm? What can I do? Yeah, I have a space of overwhelm right now. I have a garage that's full of boxes. My house isn't unpacked yet. I've got 25 years of stuff, from the basement of my other home in my garage here. I want to get a car in it before it gets cold. Right. But I have boxes of things, and I'm sorting through them, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. And it locks me up. And today I've done the same thing for 3 days in a row. I've opened this one box up, looked at it and gone, I don't know what to do with this. It's caused me stress. And I've closed the box and been like, okay, I don't know what to do with this. And I'm stressed about it. I'm overwhelmed. There's several hundred of these boxes, maybe, I don't know how many boxes. There's a lot of boxes. So I'm like, what do I do with this? I don't know. That's where I'm at. So I'm like, okay, how do I take responsibility for not knowing? What do you do when you don't know something, Nina? Oh, I've got like 5 people in my life. They're way more organized with their stuff than I am. I know who I can call and say, okay, what do I do with this? How do I process this in or out of my life? And so I don't know what their answer is going to be, but I'm on the hook for making that phone call because now I've taken responsibility for this is mine to deal with. Nobody's going to come rescue me here. And that's the thing that we get hung up on in relationships that are dysfunctional. We expect somebody else to fix it. We sit around like I was that 4th grade kid expecting somebody else to be kind and nice to me. And no, they were being who they were, and they were being it a lot to me because I was easy. I was an easy target. So if I became a tougher target, and that's what I eventually ended up doing as I grew up, then as I learned, like my mom told me to slap this girl, so I did. I didn't know what to do after that, but it was nobody messed with me after that. Nobody. Everybody knew, oh, if you tease her, she's going to hit you. And I mean, I burst into tears and got physically nauseous after doing it. I'd never hit anybody in my life as a 4th grader. As like whacking this kid in the face. So I was like, wow. But that's what it did. And I'm not suggesting that you go, don't whack somebody in the face to stop what you're dealing with. That's not how adults solve problems. Right. Adults say, hey, we're going to do this later. I can see that there's something upside down with you, and I'm not going to hang out for that. And I love you. So you affirm the relationship and you say, we'll talk later, and you leave. You do not hang out for that kind of stuff when it's dysfunctional. But you got to take care of yourself to even be able to have the awareness and the energy to deal with it in the first place.
And I also want to say that will feel uncomfortable if you the first, I don't know, 500 times.
Yes.
If you've been the nice person, if you've been the one to take, a lot from people, when you start to speak up for yourself, you're going to feel really uncomfortable. And it might even feel dysfunctional to you.
Yes. And for you, it is not normal, but normal was upside down. And so that's kind of where we started today was, how do you navigate into a space that's healthier? But we have habits, and our brains are going to try to pull us back into these habits of relating. And we have, the Bible tells us, resist the enemy and he will flee. So once you know this stuff, you're on the hook for resisting. You're on the hook for doing brave, bold things.
And you have to also believe that it will balance out, because the pendulum might swing from one unhealthy to the other unhealthy until there's like a balance in the middle, right? I mean,
most people go from recognizing that they're a doormat to being a steamroller. So, and it's really common to see people go from that situation to being the bully in the relationship. And that's not right either. Right. Like, so there's healthy, holy in the middle. Right.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And you have to know that it'll come. Like, I think also too, it can get discouraging if it's not like there immediately, but everybody's adjusting. So you got the person that's unhealthy on the doormat side, and the person that's unhealthy on the steamroller side, and everybody's trying to get to the healthy middle. So it's like it's going to take time to adjust.
Well, yeah, and when you say time, we're not talking like a month or two. We're talking like a couple years.
Yeah.
For us to be able to do this well, navigate it confidently while being plugged into the Lord. And what's cool is when you get into those spaces, you'll be able to hear his voice going, hey, overlook this. I'm working this. And you'll have laid a foundation, and then the person will come back to you and say, hey, I was really rude to you this morning. You did not deserve that. I'm so sorry. Like, it'll seem like it's out of the blue. And it's like, no, that's where you're supposed to be going. That is normal. When somebody else behaves badly, they're supposed to own that. But you can't force them to do that. And the more you argue with them, the defensive stuff, the things that we do that don't work, the worse we make it and the more we get in God's way. So his ways are not our ways. We have to try something different. And so we've given you what that is, and it works. Like we deal with women and couples, and this works. I'm telling you, 100%, it works.
It works. So, what is a healthy relationship? Could you maybe put into words what that looks like? Is it two people kind of doing what you said, owning up to their stuff when something goes wrong, when offense happens? Is it like, how would you describe a healthy relationship?
Yeah. So I'd say it's what you just said, plus a space that's safe to grow, meaning I don't have fear bonds with this person. I'm not afraid of messing up around them. I serve them out of a willingness, not out of fear, but out of love. And they serve me too. And we have each other's back. There's all those things. And I know who I am in this, and they know who they are, and we build each other up. Like, that is the ideal. That's where we're supposed to be going with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. That sounds amazing.
It's biblical. It's unity, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so just a couple more questions before we wrap up. So, what do you do? What does the person do when the dysfunction of another is, it can feel like they're, let me say it differently. So when they're experiencing what they feel like is dysfunction, but to the other person, it's a small thing and it's like not a big deal. Like it might be a scale of 1 or 2 for their person, because that person's had a lot of dysfunction in their lives, or vice versa. Like, how do you address varying levels of dysfunction where there is a healthy respect and honor for what God has allowed in that person's life? Because sometimes it can feel like, if it's being minimized, what you're going through, that it's no big deal and you just need to get over it. And then on the flip side, the other person can be made to feel like they're the crazy person. So it's, how do we have a healthy respect for the levels of dysfunction that we've had in our lives? Because everybody's had some level of dysfunction.
Yeah, that's real. And so you have it. I think it all comes down to that identity stuff. Having a solid sense of who we are and what would be considered important in an average relationship, and recognizing our own sensitivities and the sensitivities or lack thereof of the other person. For example, the entire universe would probably say, hey, that affair thing, no, that's not okay.
Right.
Other people, and when this happens, like, some people get really tipped over if a spouse talks to a person of the opposite sex. Right? It's just a simple conversation, asking them a work question even, right? And then other people have so much tolerance that they'll put up with somebody, going on a trip and or doing something leisurely after work with somebody from the opposite sex and not think two things about it, when it should be something that somebody goes, hey, should you two be spending that kind of time together? Like, you really, so you've got this whole gamut of stuff, and this, the range, if you will, of what's possible. And so knowing, first of all, where you are and what your sensitivities are, and then it's useful sometimes to talk that with a friend or the Lord,
Yeah.
especially, and say, hey, am I being
Unreasonable.
yeah, is
Yeah.
this? And then listening to that,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, maybe I should not go through his phone every single day, you know, because anyway, um, yeah, maybe I shouldn't think bad things because he talked to another parent, when we were picking up our kids from youth group and it was somebody of the opposite sex, okay, fine, right. So you have to get some outside
Perspective.
and yeah. And that is useful because you have to have a sense of your own, where you've been and where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want to be in situations like this? Well, I'd like to be able to handle whatever is going on without it tipping me over. Okay, cool. So what does that look like? And then you have to have an awareness of their sensitivities and lack of awareness, or uh, what's going on there. So you might have somebody that has no idea that not celebrating somebody's birthday is a thing.
Yeah.
Well, nobody celebrated my birthday when I was growing up, so
Yeah.
why do you care so much about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that with grandparents. Like, I never knew either of my grandparents, and so I have no idea what people are talking about. And I know that is a thing. I know it's important, but I have
Mm-hmm.
no idea how to do it. So I have to watch other people because I have an absence of awareness. It would be really simple for me to just not do grandmotherly things because
Right.
I don't know what it looks like. I've never been exposed to it. So we have to have an awareness on both sides of the fence, with ourselves and then with that other person. And I'm so blessed in that, my son makes some allowances. And my daughter-in-law asks me for things, like, they know. Well, she's never had grandparents.
Yeah.
So they make allowance for that and they ask for what they want, which I love, you know.
Yeah.
And the other grandparents do things completely differently than I do, which
Mm-hmm.
is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to try to be them. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to try to navigate something new. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we really want to do, because he's transforming us, right?
Right.
Can I have something healthy here? Absolutely. Do I know what it looks like? Not completely. No,
Right.
not yet.
Yeah. And I love that your kids have that awareness too, enough to even give you that allowance. Because I think oftentimes there's judgment instead, you
Yeah.
know, and that's such a gracious and generous way to approach it, is to think, well,
Mm-hmm.
does this person even know the healthy thing to do? That I don't think we do that enough.
Well, and it gives my own self-awareness in that space, gives me permission to myself, grace to myself, to ask a lot of questions. How would you
Mm,
like me to do this? Like, what would be the best thing here? And they tell me. And I don't experience any judgment with it. I understand what their preferences are. So, and that's what I do, because I don't know what I'm doing. you know?
yeah. If
So,
if we could all be like you,
oh,
Nina,
no, 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 aim higher. I'm trying to be like Jesus. If
like
you see
Jesus.
anything, any good in me, is him, 100%. Because I do not know what I'm doing here on planet Earth, like, at all.
Yeah. Join the club. Okay, so I think this was really great, a great conversation today. What I learned is that dysfunction lives in all of us. And there are some things you can do once you realize that it's not everybody else, that you have your own dysfunction. You can actually do something about it. So, just a few things to keep in mind. There's some responsibility. If there's a bad cycle, unhealthy cycle, dysfunctional cycle happening, there's likely responsibility on both sides of the street. One way you can bring attention to that is to ask questions. What's going on with you? Something is off, seems like. These are different phrases that work well. If you're overwhelmed in the dysfunction, then you probably need to start taking care of yourself, maybe do some basics, exercise, eat well, get some sleep. Do things that bring you joy. And just know that this is going to take time as you start to change directions. Everybody is adjusting as we create boundaries. It's not going to be overnight. You're looking at a 2-year process, likely more, to really change that dynamic. In the end, it's really about becoming like God, knowing yourself, knowing the other person, and showing up well in that relationship with his help. So, what will you do with the information you have today? We ask that you check out our website, greaterimpactwives.org, for more information. We have a free PDF for you called 5 Tools for How to Stop Walking on Eggshells. We also have some coaching products for you to check out, as well as an e-course for you to sign up if you're interested. And then other episodes on this channel for you to also enjoy. Thanks for joining today. We'll see you next time.